It's this week Parashat Ki Teitzei. It's not Purim. We just began Chodesh Elul. We're getting ready for Yamim Noraim for Rosh Hashanah. However, this week we talked about Parashat Zachor, the very famous Parsha, a few Psukim that discuss remembering what Amalek did to us, because we find them at the end of this week's Parasha.
Yeah, we saw how when you see this Parsha not on its own at Purim, when you see it here in the context of Parashat Ki Teitzei and Sefer Dvarim, you see an entirely different story, and you're able to see much more depth in what the Psukim are actually saying. What does this commandment even mean?
Exactly, because unlike on Purim, where we only discuss Zachor and their relationship with Haman and Esther and the Megillah and everything, here we see it in the context of the Parsha. This is not the only mitzvah that we are commanded to remember in this week's Parsha. There's another mitzvah of remembering and not forgetting in this week's Parasha. You want to take a look. Hope you enjoy. So this week, Parashat Ki Teitzei. Now, Yitzi, I know it's August, Elul, the middle of the summer. It's very hot outside, and it doesn't really feel like Purim time, but I want to talk about this week. The Psukim we find at the end of this Parasha, what we call Parashat Zachor. The Psukim that we read in Shabbos before Purim, where we are commanded to remember what Amalek did to us. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Now, we talked about these Psukim many times, because again, it's always on Shabbat Zachor. It's an important Shabbos. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to read from the Torah once a year, this Parsha, and therefore it gets a lot of attention. However, since it does appear in this week's Parasha, I really want to understand these Psukim in the context that they appear in here in Parashat Ki Teitzei. And when you look in the Psukim, first of all, you have to ask, what is this language of V'haya behaniach Hashem Elokecha, when God will leave you alone from all your enemies in the land that you will inherit? Then you have to remember and not forget, but you have to erase them. Don't forget. What exactly is this pasuk saying? We know there are many commandments that say Ki tavo el haaretz, when you come to the land, that when you get to Eretz Yisrael, you have to fulfill this mitzvah. But this is not what the wording is over here. The wording here is very, very different. Number two, what does it mean to remember? Zachor, but then limchot, to erase, al tishkach, don't forget. How can you remember something, erase it, and then not forget it? What is exactly Moshe Rabbeinu telling Am Yisrael to do over here in Parashat Zachor? So what exactly are these psukim saying over here? When do we have to fulfill this mitzvah, and what is this mitzvah of erasing, remembering to erase Amalek all about?
Well, you mentioned this being part of the drashas around Purim, and as such, we always talk about Amalek, the idea of Amalek. We never actually think about the fact that there was actually a nation called Amalek who actually went and fought against us, because Amalek became an idea, and we connected to Haman, and we connected to the evil. We see them as the mirror image of Am Yisrael, of what we represent in this world. But here, we're in Parashat Ki Teitzei. We're planning to go into Eretz Yisrael. We're getting the instructions about what we need to do there. So seemingly, these are the instructions about how we have to fight against Amalek. But when we take a deeper look at the Psukim, it's not so clear if this is a physical battle. And I'll explain what I mean. If the Torah says that when do we have to do this thing, whatever it means, limchot et zecher Amalek, when do we have to do this? V'haya behaniach Hashem lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher, etc. Meaning, when will this happen? When Hashem has set aside, when you have peace from all of the nations, from all of your enemies. I don't understand. Amalek is the number one enemy. If this only happens once we already have peace, we have no problems, no trouble. Behaniach, menucha, like Shabbos, rest. We have rest from all of the enemy. Then what enemy are we fighting? Obviously, there's a reason that when we speak about Amalek, we're speaking about something deeper than that. I think this isn't a drasha. It's actually in the Psukim themselves. And I think this has to do with the word zecher. It doesn't say timchet Amalek. We need to get rid of Amalek. They may be gone by then. It's talking about the zecher of Amalek. The zecher isn't the memory, because as you said, that wouldn't make sense. If we need to remember, and then it says don't forget to remember, then obviously we're not supposed to forget what Amalek did. Zecher, I think, means something much deeper than that. Zecher is the mark that Amalek left in this world. It's what they represent. It's not their physical existence. It's actually their spiritual existence. It's the mark that they left in the world. That's what we're fighting against. Once they're gone, once we don't have them, there still is this battle against the zecher of Amalek. But why do we need to remember to do that? If it's gone and we forgot, isn't that exactly the point? We don't even remember them. We forgot all about it. I think this goes to a very, very basic point in understanding what zikaron and memory is all about. If you think of it, a little kid who's curious and touches the fire and gets burnt, from now on, he'll remember that touching the fire is something he doesn't do. If If he doesn't remember that, he's going to touch the fire again, and then he'll get burned. And if he still doesn't remember, he'll do it again. Memory is what allows us to take the things that we learned, take the experiences we went through, and integrate them into who we are, into our understanding. Take those experiences and make them into a part of us. And I think this is also true on a national level or a collective memory. I think that if a nation doesn't remember the experiences they went through, they'll have to go through them again. If we believe that every single thing that Hashem brought us through and every challenge we went through is part of building up who we are, and especially this is true, and we know how true it is with Amalek, who, as we said, are the mirror image of Am Yisrael. Part of how Am Yisrael recognize who they need to be is by seeing Amalek and battling Amalek. If we forget Amalek and they are an important part in building who we are, then that's like forgetting the fire. We're going to have to touch them again. We're going to be burnt by them actually again, not just theoretically, not just in our memory. We'll have to meet them again, just as we see in the time of Purim with Haman. Am Yisrael get lost, forget who they are, forget that they have this battle against Amalek. They're mixing in with everyone, and then Haman actually shows up there and fights against them. But that's not what we want, and that's the context here. Moshe Rabbeinu is preparing us to entering into Eretz Yisrael. You've gone through so much in this journey. You're finally going into Eretz Yisrael. You're going to come a time when you'll have rest from all of your enemies around you. If you don't want to have to go back and fight these battles again, you have to have that memory. A child who has no memory stays a baby. He'll never grow up. He'll never learn. A nation who has no memory will stay a baby, will never learn, and will never grow. And I think that that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling us here. He says, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you so that you can fight. I want you to remember them so that in your mind you can keep that battle going, because that battle helps define who you are. You need that battle. You don't need to physically fight them. It was enough you fought them back then, as long as you still remember. But if you forget that, you forget why you had to go through that, and you forget what it brought to you, and you may have to go through it again. Maybe that's also hinted in the words, V'haya b'haniach Hashem lecha mikol oivecha misaviv. Hashem says, when you have rest from all of the enemies, but he adds another word, from all of the enemies around you. What do you still have? The ones inside. And that's what this parsha is about. Fighting and battling that enemy that's still inside, that zecher, that mark that's still there. That's what we have to fight. And that fight has to go on because it helps define who we are.
Very good, very good. Exactly. Like you're saying, I think one of the things is that when you pay attention to the Psukim, to the actual context these Psukim appear in, you will really notice that there was a war with Amalek back in Sefer Shmot where they suddenly appeared, Vayavo Amalek. But over here in Sefer Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu is commanding something different. He's commanding something that happened because of the war with Amalek, that became evident because of the war of Amalek, that resulted from the war with Amalek. And like you're saying, that is the enemy of within, the enemy that comes from inside. And starting off, first of all, we can't forget that in Sefer Shmot, when Amalek showed up, it starts like in the middle of a story. Vayabo Amalek. Amalek suddenly appeared. But you have to remember that it's always connected to what happened just before that. The pasuk just before the story of Amalek in Sefer Shmot is the pasuk that says that Am Yisrael were trying Hashem, were arguing with Hashem, and they had this internal debate, Hayesh Hashem bekirbanu im ayin, vayavo Amalek, that they had this internal conflict. Is Hashem with us or not? And then Vava Chibul, it connects to vayavo Amalek. That's when Amalek shows up. Amalek showed up out of this internal conflict Am Yisrael had over there. But when you go to Sefer Dvarim over here, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't mention that internal conflict regarding HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He talks about something totally different. But just before that, it's worth also reminding that somewhere else in this Parsha, in Parashat Ki Teitzei, we have another mitzvah of Zachor. We find again Moshe Rabbeinu telling Am Yisrael to remember, and that is with Miriam. Miriam, as we know, got tzarat back in the desert when she spoke about Moshe. She spoke to Aaron about Moshe, and she got the tzarat. And over there in the Psukim, we see very, very clearly that Zachor et asher asa Hashem Elokecha le Miriam, remembering what Hashem did to Miriam, connects directly to the pasuk that just came before that. The pasuk over there talks about nega tzarat. You have to be careful with nega tzarat. You have to be careful from lashon hara. You have to be careful not to get tzarat, and therefore remember also what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to Miriam. You have to be very careful with tzarat, and don't forget what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to Miriam. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling Am Yisrael over there. And maybe this is the exact format of the Psukim before is what happens over here with Amalek. Again, like we were saying, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. We're used to reading these Psukim beginning with this pasuk of Zachor and Parashat Zachor by Purim, and we don't really notice that there's something that happens right before that. And what happens right before that is Moshe Rabbeinu commanding Am Yisrael the commandment of making sure that when a seller sells things with a scale, with measurements, he doesn't lie with the measurements. He doesn't use fake measurements. He doesn't trick the buyer or change around the measurements and the scale in order to gain more profit. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes out against it in a very, very severe way, saying this is a to'eva, it's an abhorrent. It's something that you should not do in your society as a society. And from this to'eva, from this avel, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Obviously, Moshe Rabbeinu connecting this commandment with the story of Amalek, because like you were saying, the battle of Amalek was a physical war that happened when we left Mitzrayim, but the mark that they left is of an internal war, of something internally, an internal battle that we have with ourselves, also individually, but also as a society, just like we discussed last week about the society in general, looking for tzedek not being justice and not being mercy, somewhere in between being this tzedakah, this concept of tzedek in Judaism of the Torah. Same thing here, Moshe Rabbeinu turns to every individual on their level, saying to each individual, don't say to yourself that you are okay because you're doing what you have to do. You have the scale, you have these weights, you have these stones, and when you use these stones in your store, nobody's going to complain because look, this is what the scale says. The scale says this is the price I have to take. Nobody even notices that they are fake. Nobody even notices that you tinkered around with these scales, that you played around with this. Turns Moshe Rabbeinu to Am Yisrael themselves and says, you shouldn't even have these kind of weights, these kind of stones in your home. You shouldn't even have these tools at home. You shouldn't even own these kind of tools because this will destroy your society from within. Because again, on the surface, everything looks fine. You are okay. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. This is the law. Look at the scale. The scale says that I'm right. But really, the rottenness begins from within. The rottenness, the stones themselves are rotten. The stones themselves are not what they're supposed to be, are fake. You're destructing the justice from within. And remember what happens when the rottenness comes from within inside. This is what Amalek is. This is what they started with in Sefer Shmot. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu. It starts from the inside, but also over here says Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayazanev becha kol hanechshalim acharecha. This is also a very interesting term. What is Moshe Rabbeinu saying? What does it mean to grab by the tail and use it against you? Vayazanev becha kol hanechshalim, all the weak ones. What does it even mean? What is Moshe Rabbeinu saying? But maybe this is exactly what happens in societies. In societies, the rottenness begins in the weak links, and then it's used against you, like we've discussed back in Parashat Korach with the Tan and Aviram, the hatred, the big rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu Korach, where a whole unnatural thing had to happen in order to put that case to rest, in order to get rid of the Tan and Aviram once and for all, finally, after all the hatred, all the years. But this is what Amalek does. This is what they're looking for. They're looking for the weak links, for the nechshalim, and then he twists it around against you. Vayazanev becha, he turns it around against you. This back, he takes this rottenness at the end, at the bottom, at the back, and he turns it against you, and from there he gains his power. From there Amalek gained their power. And this is, like we said last week, this is what could destroy societies. This is what the Nevi'im constantly talked about, the destruction that comes from within, the destruction that comes from, on the one hand, people saying we are doing what we're supposed to do, this is all legal, it all looks fine on the outside, but then the inside, it's all rotten. On the inside, it all leads to destruction. Maybe this is what also the Midrash says, that when the rottenness begins from within inside, when the destruction begins from within inside, and you don't remember that this is what Amalek is trying to do, you don't remember that this is Amalek, this is all the hatred, and you have to get rid of it, you have to stop it right away, then unfortunately, Chaz Chalila, an enemy from the outside, a real Amalek, is gonna come and attack you to remind you what it means to be Am Yisrael, to remind you what it means to be the nation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose, that we have greater missions in this world to bring good into this world, and this good obviously starts from within us, from between each one to the others, making sure that when you sell something to your friend, you don't fraud them, you don't mess around with the weights, you don't mess around with the scales, you do it the right way, you do it the correct way, and then you won't need any of these external reminders, any of these external enemies that keep on reminding you that you're one society and you have to make sure that you have and you're living in a healthy society.
It's interesting what you're saying about these Psukim, because the commandment we would expect there was not to use these stones, right? Not to use these fake scales, but that's not what it says. It says don't have them in your home. And I think this connects to exactly the concept of Zachor, because seemingly, why do we have to remember them, right? We don't have them, they're gone, we got rid of them. And that's like me saying, I don't use them. I don't use them anymore. I used to. I don't do that anymore. And the Torah says, no, it's not enough. I want you to remember that you once used them, so you'll really clean them out. You'll really get rid of them, so you won't even have them in your home. That's what Zachor is about. It's not just about fighting Amalek. That's one thing. Then, when everything's fine and there are no enemies around you, then you have to do that real battle inside, making sure your home is clean from evil. Not just that you're not doing evil on the outside, that your home is clean from evil. You shouldn't have it in your home. That's what the commandment is here. And I think, again, that connects to the concept of Zachor.
Exactly. And of course, there's much more to talk about Amalek. We talk about them so many times, what they mean, what they represent. What is the mark that they left in Am Yisrael, like you were saying, the antithesis for Am Yisrael, the mirror image of what we are trying to do in the world, the good we have to bring into the world. The world is expecting from us to bring into the world, and the other side, the antithesis of Amalek, destroying that, destructing that from within inside. And obviously, besides Purim, it also connects to Chodesh Elul, doing tshuva, the time of tshuva, returning to ourselves, returning to what we are supposed to do, to good we are supposed to do. But we'll have to end here because we're out of time. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it on YouTube, comment below, let us know what you like, let us know also if you didn't like it. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing and help us grow the channel. And Shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to you, and Mitzvah Hashem. We'll talk again next week.